Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour. And today is Wednesday, June 4th, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's choosing to join us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeanie Ryce on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Ryce's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 20 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download from that page the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again absolutely free. You can also download from that page a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one, where people have been stepped through the worksheet process. And if you choose to listen to them even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefit from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. You can also go to your app store and type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you choose to do that before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. If you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and it contains a copy of the Dragon Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. We hope people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, we'd appreciate if you do that. You can email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org, or you can email Jeanie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. And if we get a question or a comment from you, we'll address it on the internet show, and then as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred, so you can listen back to the archives for your feedback or input. Alternatively, if you were interested in joining us live, you can go to your phone and call one of the many numbers that Zoom has available. And once you call a Zoom number, you enter the meeting ID. And the meeting ID for this first hour is 853-2357-4173. 853-2357-4173. And you can also do that from your laptop or tablet and open up a browser window and have the ability to interact with us visually as well as through the audio. Either way is fine. And we greatly appreciate when people choose to do that because it makes it infinitely easier for us to live into our intention with this work. The intention we have with this work is to be of service. And that is just so much easier to do when people are sharing with us what's working the best for them. How are these things landing for them? What what's the best way that we can continue to support you in learning about what's the mechanism that creates your mental and emotional state moment to moment? And what is this thing we talk about where we're using the great spiritual teachings that tell us that we are creators? What is it we're creating and how? And the more we can support you in discovering that and the things that you actually have the ability to change in your life to make it better or worse, then the better equipped you're going to be to make the decisions that only you can make in your life. And that's our intention for being here. The intention we have for being here is to be of service, and that is just infinitely easier to do when we know how these things are landing for people. So, whether I seem to be in the middle of reading something or in the middle of a monologue, please feel free to chime in and share your thoughts and your reactions. And just know that whenever you do, it's greatly appreciated. One of the things we've been doing in this past segment of last year and this year is reading from the book A Walk in the Physical by Christian Sundberg. And if all goes according to plan, Christian will join us live for a show August 1st here on Mind Shifters Radio. And in anticipation of that, we are going through for a second time his book titled A Walk in the Physical. And yesterday, just as I was starting to read one of these questions and answers, Susan Bingham called in, as we've asked people to do, and we had the second part of the show yesterday was the back and forth with questions. The part that I was referring to right before she called in was this question that Christian's trying to answer. The question is, I'm afraid of offending God. How can I avoid offending God? And I talked about how I love laughing at a question like this because it's to my eye and ear, with all of the reading I've done, with all the understanding I have about how everything we're talking about here goes beyond what our conscious logical mind can track. It's an infantile question to ask, how can I avoid offending God? As though God has the same kind of irritable, angry, little nasty person inside him or her or it as we do as human beings. And I just flashed on the book The Shack, where they talk about this kind of a dynamic, and there's a conversation between one of the main characters and God, and even that doesn't quite get it, because in that dialogue that was created by the author, the connection is trying to be made between, listen, if you love all of your children and you wouldn't sacrifice any of your children, how much more so do you think God is towards every child, every rock, every tree, every person? Because if it is to be imagined that this thing you call God or this entity you call God gave rise to all that is, then it falls apart very quickly in my mind. But then if you keep attributing human characteristics to that deity, to that God, then you would imagine that unless it's a bitter, angry, hurt, traumatized God, that God loves all of its creations equally. So here's Christian's answer. Remember, before we get into reading this, as a preface to this section, Christian says, to begin with, I don't have all the answers, and what we're talking about here goes way beyond words. And then the next thing he says is, I am an ignorant and deeply flawed spiritual student, just like everybody else. So please just take all of these questions and answers as they're offered as like grist for the mill, things to stir up your own reflections and get you to be living in the question and looking at every situation from a variety of different perspectives until you stumble across something that helps you make your life better. So here's the answer to the question, how can I avoid offending God? Because I'm afraid of offending God. Christian writes, you cannot offend God, period. Offense, taking offense, being offended is an ego thing. And God's perfect love and beingness transcends all fear and ego, always has, always will. It's the human ego that strives to think in terms of this duality, right, wrong, good, bad, judgment, etc. Perfect love transcends everything about duality and everything about judgment. Perfect love transcends all of this good, bad, right, wrong, polar opposites, etc., and judgment about this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. And we were working in the support group last night, and it ended up being someone doing a worksheet, and then the rest of it was just discussion and back and forth. And I brought into that lesson 3 from the Way of Mastery, where it says, every time you judge anything, right, wrong, good, bad, up, down, left, right, every time you judge, you create a constriction, a contraction, a tension within you, and the very cellular structure of your body ceases to work in a healthy way. The fluids don't move through the cells the right way, nutrients aren't transported correctly. And it's a section of the book that of the Way of Mastery that sounds as though it was informed by reading the most recent studies by cellular biologists like Bruce Lipton. So it goes directly against everything we're taught in the Western world and that's been programmed into our intellect to say judgment is unnecessary and judgment creates problems and judgment never leads to a loving or inclusive solution to any problem. Now, for the Western mind, if you're like most of us, you're going to need something to substitute for judgment. And in this case, we talk about it as discernment. And the example I use about discernment is we can say, look, I can tell you that there's a difference between the colorful artwork on this wall and the bird picture back there on that wall and the color of that love seat that's dark blue and the color of that chair that's dark brown. I can discern the difference without having to judge that one is good and one is bad, or that one is a little better than the other. As soon as I move into that kind of a comparison where one is better than the other, or have a preference for one over the other, whether I realize it or not, I've just created a tension where none needs to exist. But and by the way, it only exists in my mind when I make that judgment. So you don't need to offend God because everything about taking offense, being offended, being hurt, feeling as though you're in danger or you could be hurt, or all of that's about an ego thing. All of that comes after the initial dream or illusion of being separate. from anyone or anything. The next question in this list is, you say that for or against God type thinking is earthly thinking. And the question is, why is, quote, against God, close quotes, type of thinking earthly thinking? I feel most spiritual religions on earth are actually against the existence of a creator. Doesn't God care about that? That's the question. Doesn't God care what we think? I frequently deal with parents, and sometimes they get stuck taking what happens with their kids personally rather than taking it seriously, but not personally. And I frequently tell parents, please, as a good parent, pay very close attention to what's going on with your kids, especially the really young ones, and take all of it seriously, but please don't take any of it personally, because whatever comes out of a person always tells you about what's going on inside that person. So if you've got a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old that's angry at you as a parent, pay attention to that, take it seriously, deal with it directly, but please don't take it personally. So if I'm coaching parents to do that as one human to another, imagine how much more it makes sense for the creator to not even get caught up in that personal stuff. So here's Christian's response. Do you think that capital S source or God has an ego problem with religions not giving God or source or the deity its proper name and identity? Or do you think that capital S source has an ego problem with not being recognized or praised? And another question, and this one is metaphorical, are you really, if you really love your child, when they get into a difficult situation and become grumpy, if you completely and totally understand why they're grumpy, do you love them any less? How about if your child lost all their memory and didn't remember you for a while, as sometimes happens in this physical incarnation? Would you be upset if they didn't remember you? In that last question, pretend that you possess eons and eons of wisdom and oceans of love. Would you be upset that your child forgot who you were? He writes, we live in a world of apparent duality, hot, cold, night, day, for and against. We think that the higher realities must be the same way. But life itself has no opposite. Consciousness itself has no opposite. It has no opposite even as it experiences stark opposites for a while it's in the physical, while it's having a physical experience, while a small part of your consciousness is rooted in the identification with what this energy system we call the physical body. So this is so well stated, I'm going to read this answer again. Don't you think, the question is, don't you think that God is upset that religions don't recognize it's his, her true nature? Don't you think that the creator is upset that a lot of spiritual religions on earth are actually talking about how there is no creator as such? And Christian's answer is, do you think that God, light, love, all that is, source, capital S source, has an ego problem? Has an ego problem with religions not giving source its proper name and identity? Or do you think that capital S source has an ego problem with not being recognized or praised? Here's this question, a metaphorical question. If you really, truly love your child, when they get into a difficult situation and they become grumpy, And you totally and completely understand why they're grumpy. Do you love them less? How about if your child lost all their memory and didn't remember you for a while, as happens when they get reincarnated into the physical realm? Would you be upset if they didn't remember you? In that last question, let's pretend that you possess eons and eons of wisdom and oceans upon oceans of love. Would you be upset if your child got grumpy and didn't remember who you were? He writes, we live in a world of apparent duality, right? We have these words and these labels for things like hot and cold, night and day, for and against, good and bad. Because that's our experience, we think everybody has the same experience. We think the higher realities must be divided the same way. And yet, in actuality, Christian writes, life itself has no opposite. Death is not the opposite of life. Death is just part of the cycle of life. Death and decay, the component parts of what was once alive, break down into component parts that feed the next level, the next generation of life and growth. Death is just a part of the cycle of life. It's not the opposite of life. Consciousness itself has no opposite. Consciousness itself doesn't even have opposites, even though it's experiencing when it's in the physical, when some small part of consciousness takes identification with the physical form, it has all kinds of experiences of the opposites in the physical realm. So the next question is, did God create evil? And Christian writes, at the deepest level, the most fundamental thing is beingness. We call that also consciousness or spirit. That capital B beingness is perfect, unblemished. It just shines with the light of its own being, which is love, capital L, love. Beingness then chooses to expand the depths of what it is and to extend and expand the possibilities and the joy of what it is through manifestation and the experience of defined creation. This choice is an additive service. Through that experience, any given soul, and then he puts in parentheses, any given, quote, piece, close quotes, P-I-E-C-E, close quotes, any given piece of capital S source. In other words, if you are a soul, if you are a consciousness, you are part of all it is. You are part of the one mind. You are part of God, part of source. So through that experience, any given soul is also only, quote, so good, close quotes. At any given time, it's only so good at reflecting its true loving nature within the given contexts and constraints. Some contexts are very challenging, and the human condition, which includes the experience of separation, is one of those potentially very challenging contexts. Fear happens when, through those challenging contexts and due to those challenging contexts, the individual buys into perceptions that are not in alignment with the capital T truth. Parentheses, he says, perceptions such as I am shameful, or I am unlovable, or I am powerless, or I can be destroyed, close quotes, and close parentheses. So he writes, as the individual seeks to cope with the unnatural state of being separate and the unnatural state of experiencing fear, that's when the ego arises to protect the individual and to try to, quote, reclaim, close quotes, the power that seems to have been lost. It was never lost. It's still there. It's always there, but it seems to be lost when we're stuck focusing on the opposites and the physicality and the limitations that are imposed upon us once we take physical form. And then he writes, when the individual makes choices from fear and from ego, I would say they're the same, fear and ego. Ego gives rise to fear. Fear is what created ego. Rather than making choices from the underlying truth of love, whenever that happens, we call it evil. Evil is our word for the ultimately fear-based intent which arises out of the response to this false belief in separation. He calls it the non-native state of separation. He puts evil here in quotes and says, evil is what happens when a loving consciousness is acting from fear and ego, because that consciousness is engaged in an experience that it has not yet fully integrated. So again, what does it mean to integrate an experience? Well, think about the example that comes to mind again of the world's greatest, scariest, tallest, fastest, whip around most roller coaster ever. Everybody who goes on that the first time is scared, exhilarated, terrified, stimulated excessively, etc. And yet, when a person has ridden that ride 1,000 times, and let's say that person understands that their own parent created the ride, right? Mom was the architect, dad was the general contractor for the construction team that built it. And then that person goes on that ride hundreds of times as it's being tested. And eventually, there's no thrills and spills and chills. There's no fear because the experience has been fully integrated. So what he's saying here is evil is what happens when a loving consciousness, and what they're saying is every human being contains a spark of consciousness, so they are a loving consciousness having an experience of having forgotten their true loving nature and being in the physical and stuck in the physical. Every loving consciousness is acting from fear whenever they do something that we would call evil. And they're only doing that because they're in the middle of experiencing something that they haven't fully integrated. And again, the big picture here that Christian Sundberg is presenting is that one way to think about why are we here? Why did we ever come into the physical? What's the purpose of our life? Is that we're here. One way to think about it is that we're here to learn to be able to express loving intention even in the middle of the most extreme, painful, insulting, challenging life situations. Again, it's not that we get rid of our ego, but we start to see that our ego is simply a little tool, a very simple tool that's meant to be picked up and used at certain times and then put down as soon as we're done with it. The last paragraph in this answer says, thus, God did not create evil. Rather, God gave the soul the opportunity to grow and expand in love and joy through choice making. And that opportunity included the opportunity to be challenged to such a degree that even fearful choices were possible. Fearful choices that have us doing behaviors that we and others would label as evil. He writes, our true nature cannot change. None of us are ever truly in danger. This is why I choose not to use words like vulnerable and invulnerable and simply say we're completely safe, we're totally safe in every moment, and we can choose to be wide open and deeply honest because there is no chance of our true nature being hurt. Our true nature cannot change, and none of us are truly in danger. We're back to reading what Christian says. However, in the process of working through that extreme experience of apparent separation and apparent vulnerability, and through that process of making choices in a rich context, we add to all of what is. Capital W, what capital I is. And we help expand the joy and love of what we really are. And that service is incredibly valuable and worthwhile, even though to some in the physical it seems painful and disruptive and unpleasant and undesirable. So I'm taking a breath here, realizing we're at about the halfway mark in our first hour today. And just a quick reminder that we invite people to unmute and speak up and make a comment or ask a question or change the topic. Last night in the support group, we opened it up. People were saying hello, and I said no. We had a couple new people there who'd never been there before, so I said, here's our usual format. And does anybody want to do a worksheet, which would disrupt that format? And when somebody wants to do a worksheet, that's our top priority. So please feel free to unmute, raise a hand, speak up, or send me an email. Make a note if there's something that is coming up for you as you're hearing this and it sparks a question and you really don't want to ask it out loud or be identified as the speaker of the question, make a note and send me an email. And we'll talk about it, and you don't have to, you can remain anonymous. The next question or a heading for questions is, the heading is titled The Soul. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different essays that have a reference to the soul that he lists. But his answer, his question that he's going to answer next is, what is this, quote, higher self, close quotes? What is the soul? And Christian writes, the higher self is you, the real and complete you. The higher self is the real and complete you, unconstrained by the limitations of the physical experience. The higher self is the you that knows it is one with all things. The total you with all the experience you've had. In parentheses, he writes, as opposed to the smaller you, the human personality, which is the portion of you who identifies almost exclusively with this local human body. Close parentheses. The soul, he writes, the soul is metaphorically the drop in the ocean, the, quote, fragment, close quotes, of the capital WHOLE, of the whole. It's the fragment of the whole that is both connected and individuated and has free will. In this writing, in this book, Christian says, I'm using the two terms of your higher self and your soul interchangeably. The next question is our soul or spirit energy? And Christian writes, while we are human, We believe that reality is made of things. So when we want to know what one thing, like our soul or our spirit is, we ask, is it this other thing, like energy? He writes, all discrete things, all forms arise from that which is fundamental. And again, he's going to say that what is truly fundamental, the bedrock of existence, is consciousness or spirit itself. Spirit is the fundamental substrate of everything. Spirit does not have a precedent. Nothing came before spirit. Nothing comes after spirit. Spirit is that which is. Capital T, that, capital W, which, capital I is. That which is. And all forms, every bit of form, your thoughts, the words you speak, the actions you take, your body, everything you interact with as form, all of it, including concepts like energy and experiences of energy, all of that arises within consciousness. So that consciousness is not energy. Here's the question. Is your soul or your spirit made of energy? And the answer, he writes, is no. Energy arises within consciousness. And again, this is something that makes at least the Western trained intellectual mind smoke and sputter and short circuit, because there's no way to make sense of this based on what we've been programmed to think through our five senses and through our language and through our training and conditioning. The next question he tries to answer is, do all beings have a soul? And what is the cutoff for souls? Is it plants? Is it mold? Is it bacteria? Christian's answer is, bodies don't have a soul. Souls have a bodily experience. So it's not like your body possesses a soul. It's that your soul, your essence, your consciousness is that within which your body came into being. So it's more accurate to say that your consciousness gave rise to a body than it is to say that your body gave rise to your consciousness. So Christian writes, think of consciousness as this fundamental underpinning, substrate, which transcends everything in form. It can then utilize, or it can be, various forms within creations of form that exist within itself. So this is a self-referential loop. This is like what Ken Wilber talks about when he talks about holons. Everything is a holon. What does that mean? Everything is a part of something bigger, and everything has smaller parts within it. Layer upon layer. You're an energy field within an energy field within an energy field within an energy field ad infinitum. And there are energy fields within you and energy fields within those fields and energy fields within those. That's the concept of a holon. This is what he's pointing at with his words here. Consciousness is the fundamental substrate, and it can utilize any level of form and any creation of form within itself. And it can have the experience of being them and growing through that experience, but it doesn't change its true nature. Forms depend heavily on the nature of the form and the rule set of its local reality. So, for instance, a human within a brain is capable of a much different cognitive and intellectual experience than, say, a mouse. However, spirit can be, or spirit is, the mouse as well. And spirit, essence, consciousness can experience the universe from that very different perspective of the mouse. Indeed, he writes, spirit is experiencing every aspect of its creation, capital C, creation, in this universe and beyond. And it is all what we call capital L life. What we tend to think of as alive is an extremely narrow definition, since we tend to think of capital L life only as a physical form, whereas in fact, consciousness itself is not physical, yet consciousness contains all physical forms within itself. Again, if you're in a Western trained mind listening to this right now, circuits are popping and confusion is setting in or getting more intense. The next question Christian starts to answer is, does the soul have qualities, or is individual consciousness a neutral thing? And Christian writes, there are multiple levels involved here, which are almost impossible to speak about with language. These things, in quotes, levels, close quotes, are not discrete or separate, but we might talk about two broad levels. First is the absolute, and the second is the manifest. On the absolute level, awareness transcends all thoughts and feelings because those are forms. Simultaneously, on the manifest level, each soul has had its own vast set of experiences on many levels and has its own unique, quote, qualities, close quotes. There are many levels within this manifestation, some very deep and close to capital S source, while others are very, quote, far, close quotes, away, and in extremely discrete levels of existence. This is almost impossible to describe with language, though. The human mind, which has been conditioned by duality, tends to think in absolutes and in spectrums. However, beingness is richer and more complex than that, and all things and all experiences are not separate, but they are capital O-N-E. They are one. Very simply, though, we can speak about consciousness/awareness itself. So this is consciousness with a capital C and awareness with a capital A. We can speak about these itself, and we can also identify the many qualities of the individual soul or any environment of form. So again, just like they're talking about when they ask a question about God, is God individual or is God, not an individual and connected to everything? And the answer is yes, both and. Both and, which doesn't make any sense to our intellect, which has been programmed to think in a linear or logical fashion according to whatever's been programmed into it. But again, consider the perspective that says anytime you are looking at something and it seems to be directly contradictory or a paradox, open yourself to the possibility that in that moment, you're only seeing a tiny picture, a tiny part of the whole big picture. One of the best examples of that is how when they were moving from Newtonian physics and the laws of physics when they started to get expanded with awareness of things like quantum mechanics and quantum physics, there was a lot of debate going on about whether light was a particle or a wave. And different people, as they created different experiments to demonstrate that it was a particle, seemed to demonstrate that it was a particle, and other people seemed to demonstrate that it was a wave. And there was a lot of, chest thumping and I'm right and you're wrong and back and forth until they came up with the double slit experiment, which you can find all kinds of good YouTube videos about, where they were able to definitively demonstrate that there are times when light particles act like particles and times when light particles act like waves. So it's both and. But it took, this kind of a quantum leap to a whole different perspective in order to be able to understand that it's not a contradiction to say that light is both a particle and a wave. But prior to their experiments that demonstrated, and the double slit experiment is what you'd be looking for if you wanted to, and you can, Dr. Quantum or Captain Quantum from the movie What the Bleep Do We Know Down the Rabbit Hole. If you search for that on YouTube, you can find a 10 or 15-minute video that explains that double slit experiment. But the bottom line is, in order to be able to comprehend that there's no contradiction here, the human mind had to take a quantum leap to a whole nother level and experience things that it wasn't able to experience from this lower level of direct observation, or assuming that everything is just physical, and if it's not measurable by my physical senses, it doesn't exist. So there's no questions. Take a breath here and keep going. Another question that Christian is trying to answer here in this third section of the book is, if our souls are already perfect and already know everything, why do we come into this life for experiences and, quote, growing up, close quotes? After we die, if we will wake up and understand everything, why do we need to have earthly experience? And why do we need to wake up again to that which we already know? Please understand, in the question is demonstrating this on-off, good, bad, right, wrong, a dichotomy. We either know everything or we don't. The answer from Christian is as follows. Those first two statements sound paradoxical, but actually they're not. Your soul evolves, the soul evolves as its, quote, experience vocabulary, close quotes, expands. It comes here to have this experience and to expand its nature, in parentheses, he says, its nature of love and joy, close parentheses. It's here to expand its nature of love and joy through the physical experience. Meanwhile, all the while that you're having some part of your consciousness here in this physical body expanding that experience, meanwhile, the soul is simultaneously perfect, and at the soul level, it has access to all information, which is not the same as all experiential evolution, close parentheses. So all information is not the same as experience. And he closes this answer by saying, the learning we come into the physical realm to do is experiential, not intellectual. So for instance, if somebody says to you, let me explain to you a chocolate fudge brownie, and you've never had any chocolate, any sugar, any brownie, any confection, any kind of baked good, you've never had any of it. And the person says to you, so here's what you do. You take this much sugar, this much cocoa powder, this much flour. You take a blender, you blend them together, you whip them until they're smooth, you put it in a bowl, you let it set, you let it rise, whatever you're doing with this, and you bake it, and then you smear this fudge stuff on top of it because that's a mixture of more cocoa powder and sugar and you smear that over the top and you put some swirls in it and then you put it in your mouth and you eat it and now you know intellectually what a chocolate fudge brownie is and you haven't had anything about its experience. So, again, we're just kind of pointing fingers at the moon here, right? With our words. We're just trying to say, so imagine that you can be in the spiritual in the energetic realm without a physical body, and you're not bound by linear time, and you're not bound by form. And you think a thought and you're instantly there, wherever that is. Because there's no problem having bilocation because you're not a physical being. You're not stuck in the laws um, of our physics that say two physical bodies can't occupy the same space at the same time because you don't have a physical body. You just have consciousness. You just have awareness. And in that state, you can call it a state, in that practice of experience, you can know that you're connected to everyone and everything and that all is love and it's perfectly safe. And yet you have no idea what it's like to have a physical body because you haven't done that yet. And or maybe you've done it a number of times, but you haven't been through the ride enough so that it no longer has any surprises for you. So you haven't fully integrated it, which is the kind of thing that um, Christian is saying about his current level of incarnation, that he came to try and have an expanded experience of integrating fear, specific fears at deeper levels, because he had the experience in previous incarnations that he didn't handle it so well. He wasn't able to stay loving even in the middle of his terror, or to hold on to the knowledge that his true nature was love, even as the energy of terror was moving through the physical body. It's kind of like the idea that you can be in high school and you can read countless books about college life. You can read memoirs of people that have been through college. You can even read the college books. I mean, you'd be one of those 13 or 14 or 16-year-old kids that's smart enough to read all the books and take all the tests and get a degree way ahead of schedule. And yet, you have zero lived experience of what it's like to be a college student. When we get stuck in our intellect trying to ask questions and trying to pin down good answers for why would we come here, and if we're perfect and if we're in total bliss in the non-physical, why would we ever come here to suffer? When we get stuck in that, we're trying to understand something that we can't understand. We never will understand until we've actually had the lived experience of it. which means as we're here in the physical, we're gaining one level of lived experience, but we're blocked from remembering what it's like to live, to experience, to be in existence without the physical body. And we can't know them both at the same time without having been through both of them. The book that we're reading, A Walk in the Physical by Christian Sundberg, he talks about how in the beginning of his memory of having a pre-physical life experience, he remembers experiencing another consciousness that just had a whole different flavor to it that was attractive to him. And he communicated with this other consciousness and asked, how did you get this whole different flavor about you? How did you get to have this expansive experience that leaves you so different than from who or what I feel like I am in this non-physical consciousness? And the other consciousness responded, well, I had to have a physical life. I had to go through these levels of experiential expansion in the physical realm. And Christian said, I want that. I want to have what, this is fabulous. And the other consciousness said, a lot of people say that, but you don't understand what's needed. You got to go through the trials and tribulations. It's like somebody says, hey, you know what? I want a college degree. And somebody else says, well, you know what? I don't think you quite understand what you're asking for here. These days, right, you're asking for accumulating, like if you go to Loyola in Chicago, you might be trying to accumulate $70,000 per year of debt. So 7 times 4, 28. $280,000 of debt you're going to accumulate in just 4 years to get a degree from Loyola. And then you may not be able to get a job that pays enough to have you pay back your student loan. So people say, yes, I know, but I have a feeling and I can trust that I'll be able to make that money back. And I have this dream about this career. Okay. Now, some people actually make it happen. But nobody that makes it happen knows before they get into it what it's going to be like. There are going to be ups and downs. There are going to be sputterings and stalls and disruptions and fears and hopes and dreams and exultant highs and deep lows that are going to happen over that 4+ years of experience that the person cannot begin to imagine as they're sitting there in high school planning for this. That's just like us when we're in the non-physical and we say, okay, we'd like to have an expanded experience that we can't have in the non-physical realm, so we'll agree to come in the physical. And why would a God, a parent, a creator in the non-physical allow us to come into the physical if they know that it's going to create fears and depressions and physical pains and doubts and things we call evil actions from the person because they're driven by fear? Why would a loving parent or God let that happen? The only way that makes any kind of sense is if the loving parent or God understands it's all going to be okay in the end. And that the actual experience is going to be expansive and uplifting and ultimately loving. But we can't see that from our limited physical perspective. So I realize I've talked all the way through to the end of the hour. Thank you so much for being here. I'll remind us all that we come from love. We're made of the stuff we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. With luck, Michael and Jeanie will